October 14th, 480 BCE, just before dawn, inside the eastern residential wing of Persepolis. The air is cold stone and lamp oil. You smell cedar smoke drifting through corridors designed to swallow sound. Bare feet whisper across polished floors. Somewhere behind layered curtains, a child is crying, quickly silenced, not with kindness, with fear. Outside, the empire is at war. Greek cities burn, fleets clash at Salamis. But here, behind walls carved with eternal victory, another war is unfolding. Quiet, methodical, invisible. This wing does not appear in triumphal reliefs. No inscriptions name its occupants. No victories are carved here, only doors, locked ones. This is where the daughters of Xerxes I lived. Not as children, not as princesses, but as assets. According to Persian court custom recorded by Herodotus, and later echoed by Ctesias, royal daughters were removed from public life before puberty. Their names vanished from records, their movements restricted, their futures decided without consultation. Think about that. Not tomorrow, not later, but at birth. The silk they wore scratched sensitive skin. The gold jewelry was heavy, meant to remind them of their value. Servants watched everything. Eunuchs guarded every door. Windows were high enough to see the city but never touch it. No schooling in politics, no preparation for rule, only preparation for use. Marriage contracts were drafted before menstruation, sometimes to uncles, sometimes to half-brothers, sometimes to political allies twice or 3 times their age. And refusal? Refusal was not an option. Persian law did not record punishments for royal daughters because they were never considered agents. They were currency, flesh-bound treaties. Ancient estimates suggest Xerxes had at least 6 daughters, possibly more. None ruled, none chose, none left records of their own words. And that silence, that's the clue. So ask yourself, what does it do to a child to know her body is already promised? What does it do to grow up knowing your value ends at obedience? What happens when the safest man in your life is also the most dangerous? And why did ancient historians avoid describing this, while carefully describing everything else? Because what happened to Xerxes' daughters wasn't spectacle. It was worse, it was normal, and that's where the real horror begins. Here's what most people don't understand about the Persian Empire. It wasn't held together by armies alone. It was held together by bloodlines, by marriages, by wombs, by daughters who never had a choice. When Xerxes I inherited the throne in 486 BCE, he did not simply become ruler. He became property manager of a dynasty stretching from Egypt to India. Every relative was a potential threat. Every child a strategic piece. And daughters? They were the most dangerous pieces of all. Why? Because children born from royal women could challenge succession, could unite rival branches, could destabilize everything. So the solution was brutal and efficient. Control the women, erase autonomy early, make rebellion biologically impossible. Ancient court customs described by Plutarch and Diodorus Siculus confirm that royal girls were isolated in the Andaran, the inner household, before adolescence. No unrelated men, no public appearances, no unsupervised speech. Imagine growing up never hearing an unfiltered conversation, never being alone, never owning your own name. Psychologically, this is what modern trauma specialists call developmental captivity, a condition where identity never fully forms because autonomy is systematically denied. And Xerxes understood this. He had been raised the same way, conditioned by ritual, trained to expect prostration, taught that control was survival. So he replicated it, but with a twist. Unlike his father, Darius the Great, Xerxes expanded dynastic intermarriage. Sources suggest daughters were married internally to prevent power leakage. The family folded in on itself. This wasn't indulgence, it was strategy. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. This system required the king's direct sexual authority. Even if he never touched them, which sources don't claim, His consent governed who did. Think about that dynamic. Your father decides when you become a wife. Your father approves the man. Your father benefits politically from the child you produce. Consent disappears as a concept. This is not ancient difference. This is systematic abuse with ceremonial language. And the empire applauded it because stability was sacred. But systems like this always crack. And when they did, it wasn't enemies who suffered first. It was the daughters. And this was just the beginning. The first consequence wasn't rebellion, it was disappearance. By 480 BCE, Persian records stopped naming royal daughters entirely. Not one is mentioned in inscriptions after adolescence. Compare that to sons, whose births, titles, and movements are meticulously recorded. Before isolation, they were named. After isolation, they were erased. According to Herodotus, royal women existed in perpetual seclusion, guarded by eunuchs who answered only to the king. Even mothers could not intervene. One daughter, likely born around 490 BCE, is referenced only indirectly in a marriage alliance with a Persian noble. Her age, possibly 13. Before the marriage, witnesses describe her as lively, curious. After, nothing. No records, no festivals, no appearances. That silence is deafening, and the court noticed. Servants whispered. Eunuchs avoided eye contact. Nurses resigned suddenly. According to Ctesias, suicide among palace women spiked during Xerxes' reign, though causes were never officially recorded. This is where pacing matters, because none of this was explosive. It was quiet, incremental. One restriction added here, one door locked there, one marriage arranged earlier than expected. That's how systems of abuse survive. And witnesses? They adapted, because to acknowledge what was happening meant acknowledging complicity. By 478 BCE, multiple Greek envoys report the Persian court as unnaturally silent. Laughter was rare, celebrations subdued. Something had shifted, and this was just the first visible consequence. The daughters had become ghosts, alive, breathing, serving dynastic purpose, but erased as people. And once a system learns it can do that, it never stops there. And this was just the beginning. By the mid-470s BCE, control hardened into routine. Marriage ages dropped. Surveillance intensified. Even gestures, eye contact, tone of voice were regulated. Modern psychologists would call this totalizing control, when every aspect of life is governed to prevent independent thought. Xerxes didn't invent this, but he perfected it. After his humiliating retreat from Greece in 479 BCE, sources describe a marked psychological shift: withdrawal, paranoia, fixation on internal order. External failure often produces internal brutality, and the daughters became symbolic pressure valves. They represented purity, continuity, legitimacy. Any deviation threatened the illusion of divine order. So rituals increased: purification baths, virginity inspections, religious justifications drawn from distorted interpretations of Zoroastrianism, not doctrine, but manipulation. Think about the cognitive dissonance. You're told you're sacred, but treated as property. Honored, but imprisoned? That contradiction fractures identity, and fractured people don't rebel, they comply. By 475 BCE, interfamily marriages intensified. Daughters became wives to half-brothers, nieces to uncles. The bloodline folded tighter. This wasn't desire, it was fear. Fear of rivals, fear of dilution, fear of losing control. And the cruelty escalated, not in spectacle, but in permanence. Because once you erase choice early enough, you don't need chains. The daughters had learned the rules, and the system no longer needed violence to function. That's when oppression becomes invisible. The most horrifying incident isn't bloody, it's procedural. Around 470 BCE, a daughter, likely in her mid-teens, was reportedly married to a close male relative under emergency circumstances following court intrigue. The accounts differ. Herodotus hints, Ctesias implies, Plutarch skirts the edges, but all agree on one thing. She was removed overnight. No ceremony, no procession, no farewell. Medical historians note the consequences of early sexual trauma, dissociation, chronic pain, infertility, depression. Ancient observers noticed something simpler. She stopped speaking. Imagine that. A child raised in silk suddenly silent. Not mute, but silent. This wasn't punishment, it was optimization. A broken daughter cannot threaten succession, and the court absorbed the lesson. Observers internalized it. Fear replaced love, obedience replaced loyalty, and the system held. At tremendous cost, word travelled carefully. Other royal households copied the model. Provincial elites followed suit. Daughters across the empire disappeared into similar cages. This is what sociologists call norm diffusion. When horror becomes policy, some families were rewarded for compliance, others punished for deviation. Intermittent reinforcement kept everyone guessing. Fear became governance, and unintended consequences followed. Talent lost, alliances weakened, paranoia multiplied. The empire grew brittle. Later kings continued the practice. Xerxes I institutionalized it. Darius II escalated it. Different contexts, same pattern. Control through daughters, not cruelty, calculation, names lost, stories erased, art destroyed. What vanished wasn't just lives, it was possibility. Entire perspectives gone. Humanity poorer for it. Xerxes unraveled. Paranoia intensified, trust vanished, even allies became threats. And eventually, the system turned inward. He was murdered in 465 BCE by his own guards. The monster ate itself. Empires fall, but systems repeat. Whenever power treats children as assets, whenever obedience replaces consent, whenever silence is mistaken for stability, the same horror lives on. So ask yourself, where does this still exist? Who benefits from not asking questions? And what cages look beautiful enough that we stop calling them cages? History doesn't repeat, but it remembers. And now, so do you.